When we visualize the German war machine of the Second World War, our minds have been poisoned by decades of highly effective Nazi propaganda. We picture the blitzkrieg, endless, roaring columns of heavy panzer tanks, motorized infantry, and unstoppable mechanized logistics. But this image was an absolute illusion. The terrifying reality for the German High Command was that the Wehrmacht was fundamentally a 19th-century army trying to fight a 20th-century war. While their elite spearhead units were motorized, over 80% of the German army relied entirely on horses. Millions of draft horses were required to pull their artillery, move their ammunition, and transport their rations. Because horse-drawn supply lines move at a walking pace, the German army could not project a deep, continuous supply chain. Their logistical doctrine was based on plunder. They were trained to smash through enemy lines, seize the enemy's fuel depots, steal the local food, and live off the conquered land. When the blitzkrieg stalled in the frozen wastes of the Soviet Union, this doctrine collapsed. By 1944, the German soldier was fighting an apocalyptic war of starvation, desperately rationing bullets, siphoning fuel drop by drop, and eating their own frozen draft horses to survive. Against this backdrop of absolute, grinding scarcity, the Wehrmacht was suddenly confronted by the United States military. And what the German generals witnessed did not just defeat them tactically, it shattered their minds completely. They had collided with the terrifying American doctrine of the logistics of abundance. To understand the psychological terror of American logistics, we only need to look at the battlefield journals of captured German officers. There is a famous, widely corroborated anecdote from the Western Front that perfectly encapsulates this shock. A German infantry unit managed to ambush an American forward position. The Americans retreated, leaving behind their supplies. When the starving German soldiers eagerly tore into the captured American mailbags, expecting to find basic survival rations, they instead found a freshly baked chocolate birthday cake. It had been baked by a mother in Boston, packaged, loaded onto a train, shipped across the Atlantic Ocean on a freighter dodging U-boats, unloaded at a secured port in Europe, driven hundreds of miles by truck, and hand-delivered to a frontline rifleman in a combat zone. To the German High Command, this was not a humorous anomaly. It was a horrifying mathematical realization. Warfare is an exercise in resource allocation. Every ounce of cargo space on a transatlantic ship is calculated. If the United States military had so much excess shipping capacity, so much ungodly logistical surplus, that they could afford to waste precious cargo space sending freshly baked cakes to private soldiers on the front line, then the American war machine was essentially infinite. The German submarine war had completely, undeniably failed. The German officer who found that cake realized in an instant that no matter how many tanks the Wehrmacht built, they had already lost the war. The United States did not rely on horses. They relied on Detroit. The American military realized early on that an army is only as lethal as its supply chain, and they industrialized the movement of cargo on a scale never before seen in human history. When the Allies broke out of Normandy, the rapidly advancing armies of General Patton and General Hodges consumed an astronomical amount of supplies. Over 800,000 gallons of gasoline every single day. The French railway network had been completely destroyed by Allied bombing, meaning there were no trains to move the fuel. To solve this, the United States Army created the Red Ball Express. They took thousands of massive, 2.5-ton supply trucks, stripped them of speed governors, and created an endless, continuous, one-way loop of highway stretching from the beaches of Normandy straight to the front lines. The drivers, over 75% of whom were black American soldiers, drove 24 hours a day, bumper to bumper, in the dark, through minefields and sniper fire. The Red Ball Express operated for 82 days. In that short window, they moved over 400,000 tons of ammunition, food, and fuel directly to the bleeding edge of the battlefield. German reconnaissance pilots flying over France reported seeing an unbroken, motorized river of steel stretching from the ocean to the horizon. There was no beginning, and there was no end. The United States Command understood that morale is a force multiplier, and they aggressively weaponized the logistics of abundance. They didn't just supply their men with bullets, they supplied them with home. The War Department classified Coca-Cola as an essential wartime item. They shipped entire prefabricated bottling plants to North Africa and Europe so that frontline GIs could have ice-cold soda in the trenches. But the absolute pinnacle of this psychological warfare occurred in the Pacific theater. In 1945, the U.S. Navy literally commissioned a concrete barge, towed it into the Pacific, and turned it into a floating, industrialized ice cream factory. This massive vessel, entirely dedicated to churning out hundreds of gallons of ice cream per hour, was deployed to feed sailors and Marines in the middle of the most brutal combat zones on Earth. Imagine being a fanatical Japanese soldier, starving in a jungle cave, eating roots to survive, or a German panzer commander counting his last 3 artillery shells. You look across the battlefield and realize that your enemy's supply lines are so completely unassailable, so utterly dominant, that they have constructed specialized naval warships dedicated exclusively to the production of ice cream. The Axis powers treated logistics as an afterthought. They glorified the warrior, the tank, and the tactical maneuver. They believed that superior willpower and martial heritage could overcome a lack of basic supplies. The United States treated warfare as a massive, violent accounting problem. They knew that 1,000 flawless Tiger tanks are completely useless if they do not have the fuel to start their engines. The Wehrmacht was terrified of the American logistics of abundance because it proved that German tactical brilliance was irrelevant. You cannot outmaneuver an opponent who has an infinite supply of artillery shells. You cannot break the morale of an enemy who drinks cold Coca-Cola in a combat zone. The American supply chain stripped the Axis powers of all their illusions, proving that in a mechanized world war, victory does not go to the nation with the fiercest warriors. Victory goes to the nation with the most trucks.